Because of the role of Abigail Williams in the Crucible, we often think of the afflicted girls as servants. We know Abigail Williams in real life served her uncle, Samuel Parris, and we're familiar with Mary Warren, the real servant of the Proctors. But how many other afflicted persons were servants, and what roles did they play in the trials? Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. They're known as the Afflicted Girls, but there were actually more than 70 afflicted persons during the Salem Witch Trials. They were of all ages, male and female, not just girls and young women.
One question that's often raised about them is, as servants, and many of them as orphans as well as servants, what were their marriage prospects like? What kind of a husband and what occupation was he going to have? And we hear that in the tale of the Umancy, looking in the Venus glass to see the occupation of the husband, supposedly seeing the shape of a coffin instead. That story we know. But what were the real marriage prospects for afflicted servants?
Which afflicted girls were servants? The first girl we're going to talk about is Abigail Williams, who was in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. She was an orphan. She's referred to as his niece, and she lived with them and worked for him as her uncle. She's one of the first two girls afflicted, and she accused many people during the witch trials.
But interestingly, Abigail Williams isn't heard from in the witch trials after June 30th, 1692, and her post-witch trial circumstances are unknown.
Another servant was Elizabeth Hubbard. She was Dr. William Griggs' niece by marriage and his servant, and Dr. Griggs is probably the doctor that diagnosed Abigail Williams and Betty Parris.
Yeah, Elizabeth Hubbard, she was afflicted very early. She was the third or fourth person afflicted, and she was afflicted on the same day as Ann Putnam Jr. So just Betty and Abigail were before them. And Elizabeth Hubbard accused many. She was known for her courtroom theatrics. She may have married John Bennet in 1711 at the age of about 36.
Another familiar name is Mary Warren. She was the hired girl that was at the Proctors. She, of course, is a famous character from the Crucible. She has a puppet in the story. That's part of the storyline. This character was a real person, and she actually worked for John Proctor. He was not happy with her role during the witch trials, and he threatened to thrash her. And he called her his jade.
Mary made accusations, and then she recanted the accusations. And once she recanted the accusations, she pinned a note on the meeting house in Salem Village explaining that the girls were not being honest. And so inevitably, she got accused herself of being a witch. But then as a witch, once she came clean again and went back to the side of the afflicted and resumed making accusations against others, she was clear. Her life after the witch trials is also unknown. We just don't know where she went, when or if she married, what happened to her.
The afflicted girl Mercy Lewis was Thomas Putnam's maid, and she had previously worked for George Burroughs. She was an orphan and a war refugee who likely saw her parents and other family members killed.
Mercy accused many, many people, especially George Burroughs, and was known in the trials for telling the court that George Burroughs had lifted her up to the highest mountain and shown her all of the kingdoms of the world and offered them to her. And then he threw her down off this mountain onto jagged rocks. But this apparently was some vision that she had, and she was known for these visions of people. She saw Martha Corey turning somebody on a spit at Thomas and Ann Putnam's house.
She's also known to have married Thomas Allen sometime between 1695 and 1701.
Yeah, Sarah Churchill, you might know, is George Jacobs' hired girl. She was also a Maine refugee from the wars, and she accused her boss, George Jacobs Sr. This was the only accusation that she made, and that she was herself accused and confessed to citing the Devil's Book. Quite a while after the witch trials, she married Edward Andrews in 1709 at the age of about 42.
Do you think these were second marriages on these ladies that were married after they were 30?
It's really hard to say because the typical woman married in her early 20s at the time, and the typical man was in his mid to late 20s. So normally they would have been married and possibly widowed by that age.
Other core afflicted people we commonly think of were living with their own families, several of them prosperous, with good marriage potential.
Elizabeth Parris, or Betty Parris, the 9-year-old daughter of Samuel and Elizabeth Parris, with her cousin, she was one of the first afflicted. That's her cousin, Abigail Williams. She was relocated by her parents, sent off from Salem Village into Salem Town, where she stayed in the home of Stephen Sewell, the brother of Judge Samuel Sewell, who sat on the Court of Order and Terminer that judged the witch trial cases. And so this guy took her in, and she did not participate in legal proceedings. She was unheard from during the rest of the witch trials, but she had strong marriage prospects as a daughter of a minister. And she married Benjamin Barron, had a family, and lived until 1760.
Anne Putnam Jr. was afflicted, and she was the daughter of Thomas Putnam and Anne Carr Putnam. Her mother, also an afflicted person, accused many of the alleged witches. She did come from a prosperous family. She would have had strong marriage prospects, but she never did marry. Her parents died when she was 19 or 20, and she raised several siblings.
Mary Walcott was the daughter of Captain Jonathan Walcott and Mary Sibley Walcott, and the stepdaughter of Deliverance Putnam Walcott. So she's related to a lot of important people in the village and characters we know from the witch trials. She accused many, many people. She was one of the core afflicted people that would be in the courtroom reacting to what these supposed witches were doing. And she went on to marry Isaac Farrer in 1696 when she was about 20 years old.
Susannah Sheldon was the daughter of William and Rebecca Hadlock Sheldon. She also was a war refugee. Her mother had recently widowed. Brother Godfrey was killed in King William's War under Captain Floyd's command, and Floyd was accused of witchcraft. She accused multitudes, beginning with Philip English, the wealthiest man in Salem. But she disappears from the records after the witch trials.
And now I want to talk about an afflicted young man, Daniel Wilkins, the grandson of Bray Wilkins. He was a teenager who sadly died on May 16th, 1692. And at his deathbed, Mercy Lewis and Mary Walcott both claimed that John Willard's specter, who was Daniel Wilkins' uncle, by the way, by marriage, the John Willard specter choked Daniel while Goody Buckley's specter pressed on his chest. There was a coroner's inquest held on May 17th, and the family blamed John Willard for this death, which was one of just a few people who passed in 1692 and were attributed to afflictions.
And John Willard was executed.
And John Willard was sadly executed, yes. So the afflicted we looked at today, they're only a piece of the puzzle. As we mentioned, there's more than 70 people who had claimed to be bewitched during the Salem witch trials. And so It's hard to make generalizations. They're all different people under different circumstances. Like we said, all ages, male and female, all marital circumstances. You had married women, you had single people. And so it's just hard to make a generalization about them all being servants or all having bad marriage prospects or anything like that. Some of the afflicted servants married, others disappeared from public records. And the same is true for those who claimed affliction while living with their own families. What's true for one afflicted person is not necessarily true for others.